good evening. My name is George Anderson, and I am hosting this dialogue on Black History Month. Every February, Canadians are asked and encouraged to participate in Black History Month, and so this is one of the events that we're hosting to encourage people in Nanaimo to come and get involved with Black History Month. So we have 4 panelists tonight, and we have Shalema Gantt, Paul Winn, Alexander Reyes, and Hilde Schlosar. So before we continue, I'm just going to give you a little insight about what's going to happen. We're going to go around and talk amongst the panelists, and they'll have a discussion, and then later on we're going to have members of the audience also come and participate and ask any questions as well. So let's get into it. So our first panelist is Shalema Gantt. She is the founder of the Nanaimo African Heritage Society, and in 1999, Shalema came across a publication called the Resource Guide on Black Pioneers in British Columbia, which discussed the history of Black pioneering contributions in Canada. This inspired her to form the society in order to bring awareness of the existence of Black History Month. For the past 14 years, Ms. Gantt has directed and produced 4 to 5 successful events per Black History Month. Throughout the course of her life, she has become a staunch advocate for multiculturalism and diversity, and through her work, she has coordinated numerous festivals, productions, including Black History Month celebrations, multicultural festivals, fashion shows, and working with various stakeholders in our community, such as First Nations. Shalema, let's go into your talk about the Nanaimo African Heritage Society and Black History Month.
Well, the Nanaimo African History Society, as you said earlier, that it was formed in 1999, as I was taking some classes at then Malaspina University and now VIU University. Black history has always been something special to me, and our society started in 1999, and since then we've been going strong in the community. We want to bring a familiarity to our heritage and Black heritage in our community, and to make a nice recreation exchange of social exchange in our community. So bringing our rich cultural and our heritage of Black pioneers and the continuance of what Black people contribute to our community is important to our society.
And so with the African Heritage Society, what else is it doing to reach out to members in the community? It's something that is just occurring just throughout the month of Black History, or is it throughout the entire year?
Well, we do work throughout the year, but our main primary is Black History Month, which is February, and but throughout the year we have different events that we bring different cultures together. As you said, I'm a staunch advocate for many cultures, and our community is rich with cultures, so we invite all the different cultures to come out and enjoy the different events that goes on throughout the year. Black history is one, but we do things throughout the year, such as the Arts de Carnaval. We do that in early September. And we try to bring meetings and different kinds of talent. Talent is something that's really important, but also the word of, we have writers and poets and different genres of entertainment to bring people out to know more about our society.
And just for the viewers as well, I mentioned earlier that you've put on a few events throughout the month of February. So what type of events have you put on so far, and what other events are coming up?
Well, this year we've been very successful so far. We've had our opening ceremony at the North End Library, which is great. It was nice for people to come out and see our newest library. And that went really well. Our mayor declared Black history as being for the month of February. And we moved down to our gospel concert, which was at Brecon United Church. That was just last Sunday, which was the 8th of February. That was fantastic. We had a really good turnout and wonderful entertainers that come and did gospel. My background is, I am a Christian, and my background is the church. That's where I was raised and brought up, so that was important. And so we're moving on down to, we're doing our roundtable discussion tonight, and we have other genres like the Reggae Festival that's coming up on the 20th. And I'm so pleased that we're going to be doing things with young people. We have Alexander Reyes, who's going to be a lead performer at the Reggae Festival, and other performers at that. And we will move down to our finale, which is the 28th of February, again hosting many entertainers and other important people that will come to the community for those events.
Well, that's great, Shalema, and I know when I was on council, I attended numerous of those events, and it's great that you're doing as much as you are in our community. So we'll go on to Paul Winn. Paul Winn is a former journalist, a retired lawyer, the past president of the Black Historical and Cultural Society of British Columbia, a former board member of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, a past member of the BC Human Rights Tribunal, and is also an amateur historian on Canadian Black history. And so, Paul, off to you.
Yes, thanks very much, George. I'm going to try and give you a brief synopsis of Canadian history covering 415 years from 1603 to 2015.
That's about 100 years a minute, so there you go.
Yeah, well, I start with Matthew da Costa. Matthew da Costa is the first recorded black person in Canadian history. He arrived in Canada on the East Coast in 1603, which is, I find interesting, because in 1608 is when Samuel de Champlain arrived, of course, so that the French could then sort of take control of the eastern part of the country and establish a French culture here. Then I went into, a little later than that, William Hall. William Hall was the first black person to win a Victoria Cross, which was a very, as you know, is a very prestigious award within the Canadian military milieu. So he was important. A little side effect of that is at his funeral, somebody stole the medals off of his coffin, and they didn't appear for many years. They eventually were found in England, and the province of Nova Scotia bought them back, and they now rest within the province of Nova Scotia. Then there was a Viola Desmond, also a Nova Scotian, and she was a woman who, sort of like Rosa Parks, but before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, Viola refused to move to an area of a movie theater that was reserved for black people. She decided she wanted to sit where she wanted to sit. So she gained some notoriety by standing up and starting a little, like, lending a spark to human rights issues in the black community. Then we went into Quebec. Quebec in the 1700s, of course, had a large number of slaves, and there was Marie Joseph Angelique. She was a slave who was tortured until she admitted to setting a fire, and ultimately what they did is to punish her. They cut off her hands and nailed them to the door of the church, so that people would know this is what happens to you if you violate and go up against the system. Then into Jean-Michel, our former Governor General, which was interesting. We talk about multicultural in our society. There's a person who immigrated from Haiti and became one of the highest politicians in our country, and I find that exciting and interesting. Following her was Lincoln Alexander. Lincoln Alexander became the first black lieutenant governor of Ontario. He also was the first black member of the House of Parliament in Canada, too. So I thought he was an important person to mention. Of course, Lawrence Hill, whose book, the Book of Negroes, is very popular right now. His dad was also a very popular writer and a human rights activist, Dan Hill Sr. And of course, Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was considered the conductor of the Underground Railroad, and so she's important from our point of view in terms of Canadian black history. Then Elijah McCoy, who was a Southern Ontario lad who developed a thing called the oil drip cup, which saved machinery, in tons of machinery, and prevented machinery from having to stop operating. So that's important, I think, from point of Canadian knowing that there's things that black people did that affect their lives every day. John Ware in Alberta, he brought up a whole herd of cattle from Oklahoma and started cattling, ranching and farming in Alberta. in the early 1800s. So that was kind of important. Ernie King, also from the Athabasca area. There used to be a group called the Athabasca Blacks in Alberta. Now they just mine oil there, but I don't know if you mine oil or whether you just drill it out, but whatever. Anyhow, he was a black businessman that came eventually into British Columbia, but he was a musician, a fine musician. He owned a nightclub downtown called the Harlem Nocturne, and he also had sponsored a black basketball team called the Harlem Nocturnes, and who were the top basketball team in 1963 in British Columbia, won all the blue ribbons. Then there was James Douglas, of course, in British Columbia, the governor of the province or was a colony at that point, but he was the first. A lot of people didn't like to discuss his blackness, because he was very pale. He had a white father, a Scottish lad was his father, and his mother was black, but his coloring tended to favor his father, so people tended to forget that he had that black side of him. But as we know, he was the man who set the trend for British Columbia's growth and development. Then we go into Mifflin Gibbs, who was one of the very first settlers who came up in 1858 into Esquimalt, and he established a business. He was a very big businessman. Bought a building on the corner of Governor and Yates Street in Victoria. Big building, still there, but he doesn't own it anymore. And then Mifflin, he had his business, by the way, rivaled the Hudson's Bay Company at the time, in terms of supplying things, particularly to miners who were going into the gold fields. And swinging over on Vancouver, on the mainland, Joe Fortes he was a fairly famous character in that he taught so many people in Vancouver how to swim. I mean, he was sort of a non-official policeman at the same time, and had one of the hugest funerals when he died. There was thousands of people turned out for his funeral, which showed at the time how popular he was. And then we get into politicians. Rosemary Brown was the first black female politician, and followed by Emery Barnes the same year. And then, of course, Emery became the Speaker of the House. And as you may know, Rosemary made a run at one point for the leadership of the NDP party. She came fairly close, but she was not successful. And then there's Therese Alexander, who's probably not very well known, but she's the first black woman to be appointed a judge in the province of British Columbia. She still sits on the provincial bench today. And she's also a direct descendant of the first families that came into British Columbia in 1858. And so the point that I was trying to make by covering this wide swath is that there are all kinds of things that the black people have done to become part of the Canadian society and to contribute to the Canadian society. And something that comes into my mind when I think about how does it impact or affect other Canadians' lives. I think of a Dr. Drew, Dr. Charles Drew. Now, Dr. Drew was an American, but he was a researcher, but he couldn't do much research in the States, and so he went to McGill University. And while he was at McGill doing his research, he created a system where they could preserve hemoglobin. And he created the very first blood banks. And then he went, in the Second World War, he went to England and set up their blood bank so that transfusions could happen. So every time you go into a Red Cross or every time somebody needs a transfusion, just remember, there was this poor guy, Dr. Charles Drew, who came up with the system, and he did it through McGill University when he was a researcher there. So anyhow, those are the kind of things that I wanted to just touch on, George. And
well, I think it's very interesting because as I was listening to your conversation, it sort of showed how black Canadians actually have come from all parts of Canada, as far as Newfoundland all the way to British Columbia, and with your particular focus on British Columbia as well, is pretty amazing. So thank you very much. And so we'll move on to our next panelist, which is Alexander Reyes. And I'll just give you a brief introduction of who he is. And Alexander Reyes is a 19-year-old hip-hop artist from Vancouver Island. which he began around the age of 9. He has a passion for social justice and hip-hop music, and through his experience through music, he began to realize that figuring out how to solve world problems and also how we can motivate young people and how we need to focus on the issues that are within our own neighborhoods as well. Alexander has already performed at live events over 100 times in the past 3 years and was recently featured on international television. Alexander is dedicated to raising awareness and motivating youth to strive for greatness, be positive, and use the power of their youth to make changes for the entire community. So, Alexander.
Thank you very much, George, and it's good to see you as well. Thanks to the crowd, and thank you to everybody watching right now. I'd like to start this off with a speech that I wrote for everybody. Now, I'd like to say the month of February is a time when your leadership could change the world. It could really change the world. And the reason I say that for today, I am here to join this conversation to expand on that idea. If you know your past, you'll know your future. From Negro History Week in 1926 to Black History Month in 1976, and now in 2015, the celebration of Caribbean and African descent has evolved with the times. As both local and international musician, traveling to different countries all around the world has taught me that culture plays a large role in the way that people communicate today. As a 17-year-old, I traveled to Nicaragua, for example, to live with the Central American people. Although from the best of my knowledge, I did not have any bloodline with them, it changed my life to learn a new perspective of a new community and their culture. Black History Month sparks an annual debate about the continued usefulness and fairness of designated month dedicated to history of one race. Others, such as Morgan Freeman, say, I don't want Black History Month. Black history is American history. Personally, I believe that Black History Month is a time to learn about your culture, someone else's culture, and to come together as a community. It gives inspiration to the youth, showing us that when we're told that we can't do something, trust me, you can. Hip-hop is a great example. From being a predominantly black market in New York, over the years, as musicians were discriminated against and others were trying to hold them back from this great art form, it became the largest selling genre in music history today. Now, in 2015, we see artists from different ethnicities learning about the history of hip-hop every day. Over the next generations of this world, I'd love to see Black History Month celebrated by everybody around the world. This will bring people together, eliminate stereotypes, and create a global community. It's up to the youth of today. We have the power, we're involved, and we can evolve. Thank you for that statement, and thank you for watching.
So thank you for your statements. Very powerful and engaging, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
One question I did want to ask is just from your perspective, as we just listened to Paul talk about the history of Black history in our community and across Canada.
Yes.
How do you take that as a young person in regards to that historical statements and how we move forward with those? Or do young people need to take a different perspective with regards to how people before have built up Black history?
As I said with my first statement, if you know your past, you know your future. Right now I'm sitting here and I'm very happy, and I'm very happy for the second time. And I'm going to tell you that because I'm standing here with my elders, right? And they're teaching me something right now. They're teaching me things I didn't know before. So now I'm going to go home and share that with my friends. And you know, it's much better than going out and doing something negative.
Absolutely. Well, that's great to hear. Now we're going to move on to Hilde Schlosar. Hilde and I have known each other for quite a while, and we worked together at City Council and through the regional district as well when I was a director there. And so Hilde is the executive director of the Central Vancouver Island Multicultural Society since 2003. The society is also known as the Immigrant Welcome Center, is now in its 36th year of providing settlement services, ESL for adults, specialized employment services for immigrants, and creating a welcoming and inclusive community. They have 25 staff and serve approximately 1,200 clients each year. So Hilde, you're going to talk to us about multiculturalism.
I am, but first I have to say I don't think it's fair that I have to follow Alexander, because that was, you know, I feel like I should stand up and expend a little bit of energy. I don't know how I'm going to follow you, but anyway. In 1971, Canada was the first country in the world to adopt multiculturalism as an official policy. By so doing, Canada affirmed the value and dignity of all Canadian citizens, regardless of their racial or ethnic origins, their language, or their religious affiliation. The 1971 Multiculturalism Policy of Canada also confirmed the rights of Aboriginal peoples and the status of Canada's 2 official languages. Canadian multiculturalism is fundamental to our belief that all citizens are equal. I got that straight from the government website, and you know, I think it's really, they're really truly noble ideals, and 44 years ago in 1971, we had a lot of noble ideals. But I wonder, how are we doing right now? Are we really that multicultural a society? Of course, we're all here in what is now Canada only because of the generosity of First Nations. A generosity that sadly we did not repay with gratitude, but with colonialism. So colonialism brought us our first settlers and refugees to this land long before it was Canada. People from all over the world came looking for a better life. Many came seeking refuge, then as they do now. Refuge from war, poverty, famine, disaster, and enslavement. They came from all over the world. The Irish were escaping famine, the Chinese, poverty, and the African Americans, slavery. And it's no different today with the refugees who are coming from the Sudan, from Syria, from Iraq, and many other countries. Canada is a country built by immigrants and refugees alongside First Nations, from the early settlers and pioneers to today. And sometimes we forget about that. We forget that everyone here other than First Nations is an immigrant. I always find it ironic when I hear the kind of anti-immigrant or anti-immigration sentiment that goes something like this: please let me in, but quick, shut the door behind me. Yeah, I know. It's something that I hear all too often. It's too easy to forget where we came from or where our families came from, to forget our history and to forget our ancestors and what they went through. Black slaves escaping to Canada were not really warmly welcomed by us. I mean, we like, again, to think that we're this magnanimous country and have always been that. But they were not treated the same. They were not treated the same as the white settlers. They were not given individual land. They were living in poverty, segregated into impoverished communities. Yet they survived and thrived and showed the resilience that brought them in this long journey that they had to come to Canada. So I work at the Immigrant Welcome Center, and I'm really lucky to hear at least 30 different languages spoken every day. I get to experience different cultures and learn about different customs. And I know that it isn't easy being someone new in a new country or being someone who is in a minority. Being in a minority anywhere is a challenge in itself. We're one of the few countries in the world that actively invites immigration. We want people to come to this country because we have basically zero population growth. And we're dependent on immigration to grow this country and to build our economy. We see ourselves as a fair and peaceful country, and we have the policies that supposedly prove that. But at the same time, I want to go back to my first question. How are we doing in multiculturalism? The government can make all the policies they want, but it really is up to each and every one of us to create a welcoming community for all of our citizens, for all of those who live here, who work and play in our community and among us and are part of our society. So I think I really have to say again, are we a multicultural country? Are we a multicultural community? It's really up to you and I to make it that.
Very, very interesting comments, Hilde. And as you were speaking, I wrote down some notes, and you talked about noble ideals, and one of the questions that popped up for me was, how can we uphold those noble ideals that were put up 44 years ago regarding multiculturalism, and how do we ensure that they end up not just being platitudes, which we say, oh, well, we'll make this a symbolic gesture, but really we're not going to do anything behind that. So I'm just curious what your perspective would be about how we can change that and to turn those platitudes into substantial matters.
Well, it's funny, you know, as I said, it takes all of us in the community to create a multicultural environment. But it's often funny to me or odd to me when I talk to people or I interview people for a job, and I ask, well, what is your experience in living a life that includes multiculturalism? Do you have any friends who are from different countries or different colors, different ethnic background? Different religious affiliations, and it often surprises me how many people don't. They might say, well, there's an international student who lives down the street from me, or, oh, those international students are great, you know, it's fun to see them around town, or I just love it when you put on that multicultural festival and we get to taste all those different foods and watch all those colorful costumes. So that's not what multiculturalism is about. Multiculturalism is about embracing difference, embracing differences, making the world a better place, our world in Nanaimo, on Vancouver Island in Canada, making it a welcoming community, a place where everyone feels that they have the same rights, that they are treated equally, and that they feel welcome and feel part of the community, because they are, in fact, all contributing members of the community. So it's up to us to make that a reality. It's not a government policy that makes it reality.
Well, and I don't know, are there any other panelists who want to weigh in on the topic of multiculturalism and how perhaps we can move the platitudes into something more substantive? Paul, it looks like you have a comment.
I was just going to say that the multicultural policy, when it first came in, it was almost divisive, the way it was implemented. And I say that because groups used to be able to apply for grants to, celebrate their individual culture, so they became isolated. So within about 2 years after, the government said, now you don't get a grant unless your application is for multicultural activities. It has to involve more than just your group, so that there was some intermingling. And I think that because of that start, it confused people about what multiculturalism was about. They saw it, I think, as a divisive thing, and then of course it's grown even to this day. There's still a whole section of people who think multiculturalism is divisive and not something that is unifying for the country. Yeah.
Well, I think we could have a very, very long conversation just on the topic of multiculturalism, and just in your comment, it made me think of something else, in that you discussed that the government changed policies to make it so it was just about, that it wasn't just about your group, but that it was about the entire community in a sense,
yes.
Different ethnicities and so on. So if we look back to Black History Month, for example, and Alexander mentioned it earlier with Morgan Freeman saying, why should we have a Black History Month? In the United States, for example, Black history is just American history. And some people may say in Canada, why don't we just have a Irish History Month, or have an Australian History Month, or so on. So I don't know if any of you have any comments. Perhaps we'll start with Shalema and then move to my right.
Well, I'm not really sure about that. I just know that when I was growing up, I grew up in New York, and I grew up around a variety of cultures. I had Spanish cultures and I seeked out as a child. I was interested in all of these people that were around me. We had Italian culture, we had different cultures around us. So I think it's just, one of the things that Hilde said that I really enjoyed hearing was people reaching out and getting to know. I noticed that the government gives us grants, and one of our criteria is there a social exchange? Do we really get to know cultures? Do we talk to different people? Do we, I remember having just recently a Chinese lady that works with us, volunteers. I was really interested in her culture and her policies in her country, and how does she feel about some of the things. So I think just getting to talk to people and sharing cultures, that is very, very important. And when I see festivals and things like that, and I go and I look around, and there might be a big section of our culture, but I don't see a lot of cultures missing from the pictures. So that's where I came in with as a Black woman living in Nanaimo, I didn't see any visible Black people, and I wanted to know why was that. Certainly after I read that book, there was certainly a lot of Black people here at one time. So that's one of the reasons that Black history was started. I wanted the children to grow up and feel that they're actually a part of our society, and they have contributed to our society. So.
Alexander, do you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, I do have a comment. And like I said in my speech, as Morgan Freeman said, I don't want a Black History Month. Really, I go back to my conversation and say, it is about learning more about someone. It is about going further than just your front door, you know? So, and I actually hear a lot of this. Why go to a Black History Month event? I'm not Black, where to go? This is what somebody else would say to me. And from that, the only thing I can say is come and learn. We want you to learn, you're invited to learn. That's what I have to say about that.
Paul?
Yeah, I was going to think that what I wanted to mention was that I think the whole point, or one of the points of Black History Month is to overcome the isolation and marginalization and the second and third class treatment that Blacks were given in this society. We were considered to be less than intelligent, you know. We were sort of, how should I put it, seen as people who didn't have much to offer to the country. And so we became ghettoized in many communities. And I think that when multiculturalism came along, and we got a chance to really start pushing and promoting Black history, and I agree, it is part of Canadian history, that it's not separated from Canadian history. It's just that it's part of the history that got lost. And when I think about James Douglas, and I mentioned that earlier about because his father was white and his mother was Black, all the people who've written about him in the past have decided to eliminate that aspect of his being. They focused on his Scottish father and forgot about his mother.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you when I was in elementary school, and even to my knowledge now, I didn't know that Douglas even was partially Black. I would have assumed that he was fully white. So it's something that you continually learn through, I think, processes like this. Hilde, as I mentioned, a lot of people would say, why should we even have a Black History Month? Yeah. We should have a every type of culture type of month. So what are your comments about that?
Well, I think that's the ideal. That's the ideal, not to have to celebrate individual cultures because we embrace each other and everyone is treated equally, but that's not the case. And it's not yet, but hopefully one day we'll be there. We have to have celebrations like Black History Month to remind us that the contributions of the Black community are equal to the contributions of the white community. That Black individuals in our communities, Black settlers, and Black newcomers are as equal as all the white people who are here. We have to have those celebrations until we fully embrace and see everyone the same as equal. And that is not, and treat everybody with equity. And that is not happening yet. And until it does, this is what reminds us, this is what highlights the fact that we have to stop and think and make a conscious effort of creating a society that is truly a society for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. What I heard from your comments is that these type of events create a sense of equal opportunity and also equality for everyone in our community, in that we remind individuals that, you know what, these people did provide a service to our community, that they encompass a very important part of our community, and we need to remember that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to go to a question from the audience now, and this one's from Brendan, and it's for Alex, and it says, being a recording artist, do you have your own studio, and does it provide affordable opportunity for our youth of society?
Yes, it does. It does have affordable prices, but not to mention, when you come to the studio, you get to learn. You get to be involved with organizations such as Shalema's, the African Heritage Society, and yeah, that's what I like to say on that, not to get too off topic.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
great. So this one is a bit longer, so I think I'm just going to read the entire paragraph. So it starts out that we have the riches of our natural beauty, our resources, and our wealth of people. Our First Nations face many challenges, with all of us interlopers invading their communities. But over the last century, Canada is proud to represent multiculturalism, of which Black history is a vital part. Proud of their contributions to Canadian society. So the question is, are we proud of our diversity, or is our goal to be homogenized? How can we better support all and celebrate distinct cultures? Hilde, you can start off.
Well,
it looked like you wanted to.
But we do call Canada the mosaic, not the melting pot. And the thing about okay, there.
I don't like the mosaic.
You don't like that either. But I think the point behind the mosaic is not to homogenize, not to make everybody the same and remove the differences that make us unique, the cultural differences, the linguistic differences, the religious differences. Those are all to be celebrated. The ideal is to have that and embrace what we have in common, what we share together, to hang on to our uniqueness, but to share our similarities, and that's being Canadian.
Any of the other panelists, Shalema?
A perfect ideal world, if we live in a perfect ideal world and that had not been enslaved people, as in Black people, perhaps some of the things that we celebrate at Black History would not be something that we would have to bring forward. But when I have to explain to someone that we have opera singers, we have doctors, we have judges, we have lawyers, we have every genre that any other culture has in the world, when we have to explain that, then we have to have a month where we can highlight these things for people. I mean, my own niece asked me, when I was answering her, she asked me, Auntie, I didn't know that we had opera singers. Well, we have fantastic opera singers in the world. So, as I said, we contributed, but those things are not, some things that we want to achieve, people look at us like, you come from slavery. How could you possibly be a doctor? I've had doctors tell me stories where they've graduated and they've been friends with other colleagues, and in parties, in public situations, they were asked, are one of your parents white? No, my parents are African. How could that be? So when people start recognizing the contributions of everybody in the world, we can abolish these special times or special things. But I think it's certainly something that it gives people a chance to see that we're no different than anybody else. And the most wonderful thing about what has been passed on to us from the people who were enslaved. Can you just imagine people going from slavery to being a judge on the Supreme Court? That's a president of the United States. Wow. That's what it's all about.
Paul?
Yeah, I wanted to comment about the mosaic. The mosaic to me has always been a bugbear, if I can call it that. At the time, the government, with its multicultural policy, embraced a book by a fellow by the name of John Porter called The Vertical Mosaic. And that was the rage at the time. And when I looked at the mosaic, I said, I don't know, the mosaic to me is a static thing. It's all these tiles. They're pressed into a system, and they're all locked in, and they're all held there by the same color grout. And the tiles at the bottom stay at the bottom, the tiles at the top stay at the top, and that. And so I said, I wanted to push the concept of a multicultural salad, if I could, where every ingredient added, enhanced the salad, and when you tossed the salad, everybody had a chance to ending up at the top, the bottom, the middle, and so to me that was representing more of an equal opportunity than the mosaic. So that was my it's my personal bugbear about the multicultural mosaic.
Well, hopefully you make really good salads. Alex, any comments on the individual's question just regarding whether or not we're proud of our diversity, or is the goal to be homogenized, and how can we better support all to celebrate distinct cultures?
I'm split on each side. I'm actually a very multicultural person myself. But I do believe it's good to recognize somebody who they are, and to recognize other people and to come together as unity. So that's what I have to say about that.
Great. This might end up eliciting some conversation. Hilde, luckily this one starts with you. So get ready to start thinking about how you're going to answer. As I was talking to some people today about this forum, one of the individuals said, well, Black history is more an American type of thing because racism doesn't really happen in Canada. It's more so an American problem. So Hilde, and the rest of the panel as well can jump in as well. Is racism just a problem in the United States, or is it a problem in Canada as well, that we need to have these type of dialogues to get more people engaged and involved?
Well, maybe I should ask you that question, George. I think you could ask almost anybody who isn't white if racism still is an actual problem in Canada, and I think you'd get the same answer. The thing about Canada, we're so polite, or we like to pretend to be, that the racism here is pretty well, kind of under the table and not out in the open and blatant, not usually. It's that little, ignoring the person in line and moving to the next one instead of addressing them. It's pretending they don't exist. It's going like this. It's so many little things that people do, and that's racism. It may not be on the front page of the newspaper every day, but in quiet ways, when no one is watching, there are many people, many racists among us.
Well, that is
so subtle. It's so subtle. It's not in your face. Like, as I said, I grew up in the States. I'm in my 50s. I grew up in a time where I'm proud to say that I was with some of my family when some of my family picked cotton. So it was prevalent. There was no niggers allowed on signs and things like that. It's an N word. Nobody likes to hear it, but everybody knows it's a word that's been out there for a long time. We don't say that here in Canada. We're too polite. However, walk in my shoes, walk in my skin color, trip with me on a daily trip, and I think you would change your mind. You would have to ask yourself, I'm not dirty. I speak perfectly good English. I think I carry myself in a polite way. I have polite manners. Why are they treating me this way? Why am I the last? I haven't been told to get out or stay out. But so I walk away at the end of the day, and sometimes I feel really whipped. So yes, our country that I love so much, Canada, as well as the United States, our country has racist issues. And we need to talk about it, and we need to dialogue about it. And my friends, I have lots of friends who are white, and some of my friends understand that, and some of my friends don't understand it. They don't live in my skin.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm glad that I got a chance to comment on that, because first I should clarify that races come in all colors, okay? You know, there's no sort of priority to one group or another. Secondly, I've always believed that Canadians are what I call closet bigots, okay? You know, like they're closet bigots, and that's how they practice their racism. And if I can sort of make a personal note, now, whether it would be considered wholesale racism or just individual racism, when I was an aspiring journalist, I wanted to get to the point where I could anchor the news. You know, like, I mean, that's the big thing. You know, you want to be the news anchor. And so when I approached the administration to do that, I was told that, oh no, nobody would believe what you had to say coming out of a black face. You know, so my point was like, you mean if I said that 300 people just died in a plane crash, they wouldn't believe that, even if I had pictures to corroborate that, you know. So it gives you, and that, of course, that was a long time ago. That was in the 80s. So, you know, we hope things may have changed since then.
Alexander?
Yeah, I'd like to say racism still is around. As a young teenager in high school, I've been called many names in high school. I remember having to get into lots of fights, and maybe some teachers would understand, maybe wouldn't. But as I grew up, I saw that happening even more. Things that people say, I understand that maybe people are joking around, but you don't understand that one person that overhears you saying a certain word might be offended by that, might think about themselves differently. That's what I like to say about that.
Well, it's very interesting because at the Dalhousie University, they have some posters that are up, and they will put someone, for example, who's a gangster, for example, who's dressed up as a gangster for Halloween, and they'll say, well, someone who dresses like that, the other individuals of that culture end up living with the stigma with it for the rest of their lives and so on. So it's very interesting. And even myself, I can give the example of when I was out door knocking for my election for City Council, and I went up to one door in Cinnabar Valley, and I went up to the individual and I said, hi, my name's George. He said, I'm not interested. And I said, well, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness. I'm here to convert your vote. And he said, I never vote for a black person. And that was his words. And I walked away and went to the next door, and obviously I can tell you it didn't stop me from being elected. I was still elected, but it's one of the issues that does arise, and I think it's good that we have these type of forums and dialogues so that we as a community can actually see that some of these things are happening, and also work to see what we can do to make things better. This question's from Tony, and it's for Paul or Hilde, so both of you, if you'd like, you can take a try at answering this. And so the question is, looking at Black history in Canada, what has changed, and how can we as a society be more accommodating and to embrace multiculturalism, since government policy is not enough to achieve this? So Paul, you can start off.
Well, yeah, there has been changes. There's been changes because when you look at some of the earlier days, if I deal with the 30s, the 40s, and that, you know, the black employment were for people, they were railroad, they worked on the railroad, and they were porters, or the women were able to get jobs working in people's homes doing laundry and cleaning and that stuff. So when you think about it now today, where we have a governor general, we have lawyers, we have doctors, people have managed to move up the stream despite some of the roadblocks. So that's improvement in my mind. I mean, that has changed for the best. But I think that what we have to do is get to the point where that's not unnatural. That's just should be the norm, and when we can see it as the norm and not have to worry about it, and then we'll really know we have arrived. Yeah.
Hilde?
I just have to keep going back to the same thing, that it's an individual responsibility. It's not them, it's us. It's me, it's you, it's everyone that has to embrace diversity and be inclusive of everyone. And that's how change happens. It really doesn't happen from the top down.
Do any of you want to comment on this as well, or?
I just think it's, communicating, having dialogue such as this, having discussions, it kind of get rid of some of the stereotypic things that are out there. Racism is, it's like a disease that kills people. If it gets in your heart and you're having to deal with it on a daily basis, it is hurting. It is hurting. So I would embrace people to come away from their heads and try to get into their hearts, and to know that we're all human beings on this earth, and we can have a better world if we learn how to talk to each other and communicate with each other, and try to step out of your world into someone else's world for a little bit.
Alexander, any comments on what we can do to be more accommodating and to embrace multiculturalism? Because I think that Tony is trying to say that government policy alone is not going to be able to change the issues that we have in our society. And so I'm just curious, do you have a perspective from being a young person?
Yeah, being young, you get a lot of stuff from other people. You hear things around, you pick it up, you're going to say it, right? But it's really about becoming your own person and realizing you can be best friends with someone else who's not like you, but you are very similar in different ways. So I think people really need to understand that point.
And I'm going to follow up on that as well. Quite often, you'll have young people have a much different perspective than their older counterparts, for example, who will say, well, I went through this period of time where I couldn't sit in a certain part of movie theater, or I couldn't go through a certain door to a bar. Younger people may say that, oh, well, that doesn't happen to me now. I can go into the movie theater and sit wherever I want. I can go into a restaurant and know that I'm going to be served whenever I come in. So do you sort of relate to some of the comments as in what happens with the older generation and how younger people are moving forward? Or how does a younger person who hasn't gone through that experience perhaps move forward and try and make our society more inclusive? Or is it already inclusive enough that we don't need to do more?
I understand this. A lot of stuff did happen that hasn't happened to me right now. But you have to understand different things are happening. So for me to change the future that's happening right now to me and how we're getting discriminated against as youth, we need to look at our past and say, okay, how did our elders change things? How did they work so hard to get it the way it is? And that's what we need to do as youth. We need to change what's happening right now, because not everything is all good.
Okay. Well, thank you. So this one's from Tony as well, and it's for all of you. And it's just, how can we highlight some of the unique things that the larger community can learn from the culture of Black people that can benefit all of us?
Nanaimo African Heritage Society has an amazing amount of sponsors in our community. I take the opportunity to invite everyone to come out, see what we're all about, to come out to the events and support us in the way of learning more about what we do in our community and what we are contributing to the community. We invite all of our community to embrace our culture, to understand how it helps our world and how we have contributed to our world. So I'm inviting the whole community to come out and embrace Black history this year.
Hilde, do you have a comment here?
Well, I think get involved, participate. I think going to Black History Month events is a really good way to connect with people who you may have never connected with before, and to learn something you don't already know, Or maybe you do already know it, but you can develop that. You can expand on that. I think getting involved in so many things in the community enriches our lives, and getting involved in learning about other cultures enriches our lives. And anybody who doesn't do that, I think, just misses a great big piece of what life can be all about.
Paul?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, because what I think is that people will learn if we can highlight important things that affect their day-to-day life that were a direct contribution by, say, a black inventor, for instance. You know, I talked about Dr. Drew and his, you know, the blood, so people can get transfusions, and, you know, and that helps preserve and save lives. But there's a whole bunch of other things like inventions that affect everybody's day-to-day life. And the next time you're at a stoplight and it's red and you're waiting for it to turn green, just remember the guy who invented that system was a black inventor. And I think that's, you know, well, I didn't know that. Maybe there might be a connection that'll come to people's minds and say, whoa, that's interesting. Maybe I better look at black people differently than I've looked at them before, or think differently about them. And it's an important thing. The shoe industry, I mean, that's another thing. The shoe industry was revolutionized by a guy who learned to mass produce shoes. At the time, they used to stitch them individually. If you wanted a pair of shoes, it could take a month to get them. But then he invented a lathe machine that spitted out shoes, in a great thing, changed the whole wholesale and retail industry of shoes in the world. So I think, well, you got shoes on your feet, think about that, you know? I mean, and the price is not too bad because of that lathe machine. At least that's how I view things, might help to change things a little more.
Well, our BC, for instance, was a territory. When 1858, when the pioneers first came here, it was just a territory. So James Douglas had the settlers that came from San Francisco that was escaping slaves. Those people came here and they contributed. Where we are standing today, blacks helped to build where we are today. They've made a major contribution. So when I'm out at the public promoting Black History Month, I'm saying our community, and I truly mean our community. I don't mean your community where I'm visiting. I mean our community where my forefathers paid a price for us to be here, as well as any other people. There are many people that contributed. We are just one more culture that contributed. That is simply as that.
Alexander?
Yes. For me, I believe this is great because, you know, in school one day, it was like we learned one day of Black history, right? And there was all these other topics coming through I didn't really remember, but to have Black History Month, it really refreshes your mind and shows you that there were pioneers here and that you can learn about that. Second of all, I'd like to say there's so many organizations out there that you can learn from. You can go to the library and get a free card today. You can come to my studio, make music, and learn about history and work with other multicultural people. So that's what I'm saying. You just need to look for it. If you want to find it, it's there for you, the information.
Well, and it's interesting in regards to the inventor side of it as well, is that Lewis H. Latimer, for example, was the inventor of the electrical filament, which all these lights that are in this room right now, or the ones that we use at home, was invented by a Black individual, which ended up helping to go with the light bulb as well. So it's interesting, and I'm sure, I think that last year you did a highlight on Black inventors as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, every year we have a program book that we put out, which is full of history, and a lot of our sponsors this book. And we have a theme every year, and so we had a host of inventors, and we've revisit that again this year in our book. So when you come out to our programs, you will go away with a lovely little book that has a wonderful array of history. It's so amazing to me that I've had people call me back as far as Toronto, Alberta, and tell me about some of the stories that they read and that they were really, truly impressed with, and hearing some of the history, and really, really amazing history.
So I have another question from the audience, and this one is from Daisy, and this is to all the panelists. What advice can you give to those who have experienced racism or actually discrimination? Alex, we'll start with you.
I'd like to say what I started doing myself was giving people a little bit of a history lesson. They're going to say something ignorant, but I want to come back with them with a smile and saying something positive, and maybe they can learn from our conversation. Because I understand if they're thinking that way, it's a one-way street. They obviously haven't been taught another way. So that's what I'm saying.
Shalema?
Some of our forefathers, Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, there was times where people are racist towards me and I get a little angry and I get hurt. But it's Nelson Mandela and it's people like Martin Luther King that reminded me that they went through all the turmoil that they went through with love. And that's why I'm feeling more and more. As I get older, I'm learning the word love more than anything is understanding and trying to combat some of that hatred, and because a lot of it is silly and just people not stepping out of their box and saying absolutely ignorant things and I feel more for them than I feel for myself when I'm met with this, because I feel like this poor person who has to live in the world with this kind of feeling. So I think I'm coming from my heart these days. I'm enjoying that.
So Hilde, you deal with people who come from all over the world and at the Multicultural Society. What type of advice would you give to those who are experiencing discrimination in our community?
I don't know how appropriate it is for me to give advice on that because I haven't experienced it. But I would have to say that it's really a reflection of something lacking in the other person, not in you. And I think that anyone who is the victim of racism needs to remember that. They need to hang on to that. This isn't about you, this is about something that's missing in that person. I think that people have a natural fear of what they don't know and what's not familiar, and that includes other people. And even if we can go back to the beginning of mankind, and people congregated in their families and their tribes, and their tribe got a little bigger as they became more mobile and so on, but it was always safety in that tribe, whatever that tribe was, and fear of anyone else. And some people seem to still experience that. And I think it's sad because we have the opportunity in this world to think more globally, to act more globally, to meet many different people without fear, to learn to understand them. We have the intelligence and the knowledge and the access to information, the capacity to understand that there are differences between people and it's not something to fear. But I really do think that the biggest thing for people who do experience that is to feel absolutely confident and deep in their hearts to know this is a shortcoming of the other person. This is not you.
I think that there's a common thread here, and I just recently finished reading 2 different books. One was by Leon Panetta, his memoir called Worthy Fights, and his family immigrated from Italy in the early 1900s, and then also the other one was One Nation by Ben Carson, who's a neurosurgeon in the United States. And one of the things that they talked about was the type of discrimination that they might come upon, and also individuals who may be untoward towards them. And so one of the things that they talked about was positivity, and saying that they weren't willing to go down to the level of those individuals, that they were willing to have that conversation, even with a person who was being quite rude, and just say, you know what, this is their problem, but I'm not going to stoop down to that level, that I'm still going to be the person that I am and realize that I'm full of worth, and still continue to live my life the way that I am. So I think that's a very positive discussion that we had right there. I think one of the things that we sort of didn't go in depth enough about, this will be the last question that I'm just going to ask of you before we wrap up, is just the multicultural experience in Canada. And one of the things that we do, we have a multiculturalism minister who tries to promote multiculturalism with Chinese New Year, Black History Month, and many other events throughout Canada. But how do we get to that? How do we get to that place in Canada where people feel that they don't have to hide from their identity, whether it is being an Aboriginal person in this community, being Canadian, or being a Black Canadian, or being an Italian Canadian? How do we get to that point where individuals can embrace who they are and also be Canadian at the same time? I don't know who might want to start.
You know, there's lots of shows on now that is, people are doing their genealogy, and we're finding out more and more and more as the world go on how brothers and sisters, cousins, how we can be related to each other through our blood. I think if, you know, anthropologists has gone back as far as we all came from Africa. They have not disputed that yet, that we all came from one mother, Africa. So I think that if we start realizing how much we are alike as opposed to how different we are, I think that could be a key for us to start realizing how much we have in common as human beings than we have as something different.
No, yeah, I agree with you that you've got to, I think if we explore our similarities, we find that we have more similarities than we have differences, you know, as people, as human beings. There might be, you know, our language might be different, maybe our ethnic dress might be different, but if we deal with the similarities, our aspirations, our hopes, the things that we would like for ourselves, our family, you find that everybody that you talk to, I think as a family says, what do you want for your family? How, you know, and you'll sit down and I bet you they'll all have the same story or the same wish, but they may look different, you know, when on the outside, but in the inside, boy, they've got the same desire and hopes for themselves. Yeah.
Alexander, do you have any comments?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I spent so much time in Central America, so much time in Africa. I spent so much time back here home in Canada. And what to me that I've figured out is that exactly that. We are very similar. I realized that what happens to the Aboriginal people here in Canada is well happened in South Africa, very similar. So things happen all around the world, and if we want to change, we got to change together.
Hilde?
It just made me think of last year we held a multicultural speaker series, and it went on for 4 weeks, and every Wednesday evening we had 2 people from different countries talk about their home life and their journey to Canada. And what struck me each and every time, and what struck them, was how they began to say, yeah, my life was just like that, like my family was like that. My mother was like that, or we told stories like that, or that's almost the custom we had, or the food that we ate. The similarities kept coming out again and again, and I think it's really poignant that is what makes us one people, that makes us capable of respecting each other and accepting each other and embracing each other, because we share more than we have different between us. We have the same feelings, we have the same needs, and we have the same goals in our lives. And I think if we can come together on those similarities, then the differences just fall away.
And that's interesting, because I noticed all of you actually mentioned something about how we all have these similarities and we have these needs. And I've been doing a lot of reading, and one of the last books I had read was The Needs of Strangers by Michael Ignatieff, and he talks about individuals' needs and how people don't really earn the needs that they have, they just have them. So for example, I have a need to be around people because I like being around people. I have a need for knowledge because I want to be able to go on and do things to help my community and so on. So in that similarity, we see a lot of divisiveness at the same time, but we don't acknowledge those differences. And so how do we go about making or encouraging people to say, you know what, we actually are very, very similar. We all have these intrinsic needs within us that we need to fulfill, and that we should be working together to achieve those goals. I don't know if anyone has comments on how we can do that, because is it through the political level of going to our city councils, to our legislatures, to Parliament to say you need to put in new policies regarding healthcare services or multiculturalism that actually have substantive marks on the ground, or is it just through our day-to-day conversations of where we say that, you know what, it's not okay that you called this person insert blank? Paul, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I think that when I look at how we function in our society, you know, we have to be respectful of the other person. You know, they may be a jerk, they may make stupid comments, but you try to engage them in civil debate, if you like, to try to convince them to overcome and change their mind about stereotypes, because that's the kind of thing that I think is at the bottom of a lot of problems. You know, oh, well, I know movies and things have portrayed blacks in a certain way for ages, and so everybody thinks, well, that must be what they're like, you know. Well, you're different, you're not like them, but the point is, yeah, I am like them, and they're like me, but the stereotype doesn't fit. And I think that's for me is a key thing, is overcoming those stereotypes and refuting them. And it's Black History Month and these panels like this that I think help make a stride towards overcoming it.
I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Shaw for giving us this opportunity and giving us this forum. I also like to thank the audience that have come here today and all our panels that are here and giving us this opportunity. I think if we think of out of this planet, if someone landed here today and they were from another planet, I think that they would just see I don't think that they would say, you're white, you're black. I think they would just see humankind. So the Nanaimo African Heritage Society, again, invite everyone to come out, learn something about our culture. And when I say our culture, I truly mean our community, our culture. Come out and celebrate Black history and be a part of what we do in the community. Take these opportunities to get to know other people. And I've never been into politics, but I had recently had to go to our city and have a conversation with our mayor and our city council. It did give me a little feeling of politics, which means that maybe writing letters to the government. Thank you so much for the government that spent thousands and billions of dollars, millions of dollars on culturalism and wanting to raise the awareness. They're putting blacks on stamps and so forth. I think I would like to write the government. I'd like to understand the government. What's behind that? Do we just put a bunch of money out there? Or how does that affect us in other ways? How can we come together as people?
And I think it's interesting because you did mention about, well, there's mention by Paul and then by yourself about engagement and also looking at our community as inclusive, not just based on the color of our skin, because, for example, the Stark family in Chase River and also in Salt Spring Island, and I'm sure other parts of, as Paul has mentioned, British Columbian pioneers as well who have made significant contributions to British Columbia. Alexander?
Yes. I'd like to say that I don't know. I understand that people are very influenced by the government. We look up to the government. But I think it really starts with us to become leaders today. It's 2015. I think we need to become the leaders. We need to take the action to become the same, and we need to talk to each other. And to the youth, I say, you have the power. We can make the change.
You know, I can tell you someone might be ready for a life in political office after that comment. Hilde.
Okay, I have to add to that. If you vote, if you vote, you can make change. Vote, very important. I think that ultimately it's, you know, something that Paul said, sometimes a jerk is just a jerk. It doesn't matter where he came from. And it's important not to mix that up, you know, not to assume that maybe you've only met one person from Iran and you didn't like him very much. You can't judge the whole country and everyone in it based on that.
Well, I think it's very interesting what those comments. I think everyone's made a very valuable contribution to this entire dialogue. And so I'm going to start in with closing comments, and we'll start with you, Hilde, and we'll move our way back to Shalema.
Oh, I don't know if I have any.
You have a minute and 58 seconds left, so.
Well, that's actually more than I need. I think that, again, we've talked about so many things, and I have to keep going back to the individual responsibility. The individual responsibility to become educated and to extend a hand, to get to know someone else, to step out of your comfort zone if it means stepping out of your comfort zone because your world is too small. And I think if your world is so small, you're really missing out on something. And everybody has that opportunity, and it's a very simple thing to do.
Alexander?
So as Martin Luther King said, once you put your individualistic ideas behind, you really start living. And with that, I would like to say it's time to start joining organizations that have a positive outlook, just like the Nanaimo African Heritage Society. Start doing music, start doing dances. We have a great studio that I run with Brandino Smith. I'm just saying it's time to make a change, and we're here to talk to each other and just look at the past, look at the pioneers, because today we can become a pioneer. So thank you.
Paul?
Yeah, I mentioned exploring likenesses and differences, and I think that's another key to getting to know each other. I made the reference that Canadians are closet bigots. We've got to get them out of the closet. They have to be able to have a comfort zone to discuss their concerns and their beliefs, without being dumped on. It's just what you were saying. Like a jerk may be a jerk, but we may be able to have an opportunity to educate the jerk to have a different attitude, and like, because we look at, somebody said to me the other day, we were talking, and to fit into the example, they said, well, Barack Obama got elected president of the United States, so that's the end of racism. They have a black president. And I said, yes, I noticed that, and I noticed that when Canada elected a female prime minister, sexism disappeared. So it doesn't happen overnight, but the attitude of some people think that because somebody of a high profile and prominence, it makes everything else underneath disappear. It doesn't happen that way. They're a good example, but they're not the tail end of the book. Yeah.
Very good. Shalema?
I often think as a person I'm a 50-foot woman who has one leg in Canada and one leg in the United States. I don't make a difference between Canada and the United States. Racism, it exists wherever it. And Dr. Martin Luther King said, for it to be real, it has to be felt and seen. So I, again, thank everyone for this opportunity and this forum. This was something that is new this year, and I would like to see this continue. Thanks, everyone, so much.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a very good dialogue, some things that I didn't know about, and I'm sure many people who are watching at home and the audience here as well who really enjoyed your conversation. I am going to end with a quote from Martin Luther King, and just in regards to the dialogue, and it says that the measure of a person is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. And I think that's something that this panel has tried to discuss and encompass, that it's our community, it's all of us inclusive, that we do have a common thread, that these type of issues we can only combat together. And it's through our community being inclusive and through multiculturalism efforts and things that the Nanaimo African Heritage Society is putting on, and you, the panelists being here tonight, that we're able to accomplish those goals. So just to wrap up, it's the month of February. There's still a couple of events that are still being put on by the Nanaimo African Heritage Society. And as I mentioned, it's an opportunity for you to learn about the wide range of the African experience, and including racism, the vital role that they have also played in this community as well. So thank you very much to Shaw TV, the Nanaimo African Heritage Society, Shalema, Paul, Alexander, Hilde, thank you very much for being our panelists. The audience as well behind me who has participated and asked questions of the panel, and also to everyone at home who's paid attention and has watched the dialogue as well. Thank you for tuning in, and that's it for tonight. I'm George Anderson, and thank you very much.
Thank you.